Pleasure of introducing our speaker today was Jim Berry. Jim is the industrial hygiene consultant with the Wisconsin OSHA State Consultation Service. He has got 12 years as an OSHA person, and he started as an OSHA compliance officer. He also has over 20 years as a member of our AFS Safety and Health Committee, which is now the 10Q, where he currently serves as vice chair. Jim is a frequent speaker at the AFS CMI safety courses and considers himself a recovering OSHA inspector. Now, before I turn it over to Jim, I've got to add a commercial here. For more current EHS information, plan on attending our upcoming EHS conference, which is scheduled for the 16th to the 19th of August in Indianapolis. Details can be found on our website. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim, and we'll get going on what to do when OSHA shows up. Here's Jim.
Thank you, Fred. Another part of my resume was I actually worked in a foundry for a couple of years, and then switched over to working for the government. And I was a federal OSHA compliance officer for 12 years, and then for the last 20, I've been a consultant. We consult with small business to get them up to speed on OSHA. And every state has a consultation program, so if you want to take advantage of that, you can look it up. Sometimes it's in the State Department of Labor, sometimes it's at the university. And the only restriction we have is you cannot have more than 250 employees at one location and no more than 500 in a corporation. So with that, we'll continue on here. See if I can get computer shock here. Here we go. Okay. So where does OSHA go? Who do they pick? The first place that OSHA will go is a thing called an imminent danger. Or they'll get information that somebody's about to be killed. A good example of that is somebody working in a trench with the sides caving in and that sort of thing. And when I was an OSHA inspector, I had to go out on a couple of those. So if they're in the office, they'll drop everything and go charging out there. Next priority that OSHA has are fatality and catastrophe investigations. And fatality is obvious, death. And a catastrophe is 3 or more people admitted to the hospital. And if you do have a death, a fatality, or catastrophe, you have to notify OSHA within 8 hours. And a lot of times they find out about it through the news media anyway. So after that, their next priority is complaints and referrals, and that's where they get most of their work. When I was working there, we never got caught up on complaints. And they have different kinds of complaints or referrals. A formal complaint is made by a current employee, and they want that employee to sign the complaint form. They're not going to tell the employer who it was, but they need to have a signed complaint by a current employee, and most people are relatively honest. And if they've just been fired and they're worried about the next people coming, OSHA doesn't necessarily go on that. But they have them sign it so they can correspond with them. And and get some feedback. And a good way to get an OSHA inspection is to kind of disregard safety and health in the workplace, because if you're letting that program go, things get looking bad and the people start thinking they might want to turn you in. Another type of complaint or referral is the referral from the other OSHA discipline. Like if a safety inspector went through your place and they saw there was a lot of dust or it was noisy and people weren't wearing earplugs or whatever, they would refer it to the other discipline. Sometimes doctors will call the OSHA office and say, we've got these couple of cases of this disease, so maybe you should check with it. And sometimes other government agencies will call OSHA. And another line of another form of these complaints is called a non-formal. And I alluded to that before. And that's usually, an ex-employee, somebody that's mad at everybody, so they turn them in. When I was an inspector, I had one where I went into the place and the guy said, what took you so long? We've already had the DNR in here and the EPA and the city and county. So OSHA, you would be surprised how many of those OSHA does not respond to. Sometimes it's from a competitor, sometimes from Johnny's mom. Johnny comes home all dirty, so the place must be terrible. Those are non-formal complaints, and usually they the OSHA office will set out a letter or give them a phone call and fax some of the information to them. And sometimes the letter they sent will suggest that they contact somebody to look into things, like us, if they need some air testing. But I'll tell you this, if there's no response back from the company, that's a pretty good way of getting an inspection, because OSHA thinks you're just blowing it off. And even so, even if you give a good letter, say, well, we fixed this, and send them some pictures, they're going to do a small number of those anyway, just to make sure the world's playing square with them. So there's more. Now, once they get caught up on those complaints, like I said, that's usually most of their work. Then they have a thing called a general schedule. That's programmed, and a lot of you know about this, site-specific targeting, where it's not just by your SIC code or your type of business, but they do individual surveys, and the people with the highest DART rates, days away in restricted time injuries, OSHA usually send them a letter and say, well, we're concerned that you got a high injury rate, so please do something about it. And then they try to pick out the highest DART rates and do those first. Then each area or region, or there's lots of programs for special emphasis. And one of the latest is primary metals, and I think that is in Region 5, which most of you are from. And there's a good chance they're going to come out and visit you on this primary metals special emphasis program. And they also have other programs, silica and lead. Companies with machinery that could cause amputations get on the list, and then they don't necessarily look at everybody with powered industrial trucks, because that is just about everybody in manufacturing. So they have program schedule. And then they will do a certain number of follow-ups to previous inspection. Not everybody gets re-inspected. It just depends on how much time they have to go out to folks. But if you send them a good response, we'll get into that, they're likely not to come in and give you a re-inspection. So if you're lucky enough to get picked, what happens? Well, the inspector will show up, and at the front desk, they can't sneak in the back door. They have to announce who they are. So it's up to you to figure out if they're a real one or not. Because at the beginning, there were some imposters, which is kind of a way to make a quick buck. But they walk through, they say, I'm from OSHA, and they'd walk through and then say, that'll be $500, and you can pay me check or money order. Well, if you have any suspicion that this person looks a little shady, just get out the phone book and look up the local OSHA office and call them and say, is this really one of your inspectors? And that doesn't happen much anymore, but you want to make sure that you get a real inspector. So then the inspector will have an opening conference. They're supposed to ask for the head person, company president, and then a lot of times it gets assigned down to whoever the safety person is in the bigger place. And then their duty is to inform you, as the employer, what's the purpose of the meeting or of the inspection and how big it's going to be. So sometimes they might be told to just restrict it to the area of a complaint, which could be just a cleaning room, or maybe they're supposed to do the whole place. Now, there's always a chance for you as an employer, under the Fourth Amendment, you have the opportunity to deny entry for them and say, no, we don't really care to have an inspection today, so could you please get out of here? Then the inspector will say, well, okay, sorry I took up your time, so I'm going to go down to the federal magistrate and get a warrant, is what they do. And you can call, tell them to stop the inspection anytime you want if it's really going some way you don't think is correct. And they would have to go down and get the warrant anyway. But when I was doing that, I had to get quite a few of those, and I had one where the magistrate said, well, they always ask for a warrant, so when you get in there, don't miss anything. So, holy smokes. I always tried to be as objective as I could with or without a warrant. But to be honest with you, from the compliance officer's standpoint, it's kind of a pain to get one. You gotta convince the magistrate that you have just cause. But generally, there's not a problem getting one. It's just a little bit of a problem. Then there's other things that the inspector is going to do once you get past this possibility of denial of entry. Most people don't, and that's up to you to decide that. But then there's certain things the inspector is supposed to do, and they won't necessarily do them in the order I've got them listed on these slides. But eventually, before the thing's over, they will have wanted to do a records review. So that'll be like your injury and illness logs, some of your programs, and they're not going to say, "Give me all your programs." Wait till they ask you for the individual ones. Then they may do a walkthrough, which is walking through the place, inspecting. And it may take several days if there is industrial hygiene sampling required. The industrial hygienists are required to sample for the whole shift, if possible, for things like silica and noise and metal fume. And it might take several visits. And there might be other times they have to come back because something unusual happens. Maybe you only pour a certain kind of metal on one day of the week, so they might come back and want to look at that. So after the walkthrough and all the testing and everything, then the compliance officer will set up a closing conference with you, and then they'll go over what they found. So they'll discuss abatement dates with you, and you can kick it around. So and then they'll give you the industrial hygiene test results, and just go over them with you. So then you might receive a citation after the inspection. It's all over. The compliance officer has left. They go back to the office, and then they write up whatever they think their findings are. Then their boss, the area director, may send you a citation. They have a 6-month limit to get this thing out from the time they see a apparent violation to get the citation out. And on the real involved ones, it takes them all 6 months, but they can't go past that 6 months. Now, if you get a citation, what a lot of people will do if it's the first inspection they've had in a while is call in for an informal conference to meet with the area director. So that's has to be done within 15 days of the receipt of the citation in the mail. They'll send it to you registered or certified. And what I suggest you do is make sure that you're going to meet with the area director because you want to meet the big boss. Sometimes they have one of their lieutenants sitting in, and it's not necessarily the person you might want to meet with. So when you make the appointment, ask to see the area director because you want to meet the big boss. And at the informal conference, you can talk about anything you want. You can talk about maybe the penalties weren't high enough, or maybe they missed something, but I don't think you'll talk about that. But what it usually boils down to is a settlement on the times and the money, what the penalty may be. And OSHA does have this first instance penalty. So if they see something out in the shop, and even if you fix it right away, they're obligated to write it down and depending on the severity of it, give you a citation with a penalty. After you've had that informal conference and you decide you're going to go ahead and fix what they said, after you fix them, make sure you keep the OSHA office informed on what you're doing because they don't like to be just sitting there not knowing what's going on because they'll think you're not doing anything. So let them know, send them pictures or email them or keep in contact with them is the best way to do it, even if you don't like them. Now, there's legal possibilities, and we are a country of laws, and the legal possibilities are if you go to that informal conference, or even if you don't, and you just flatly disagree with the thing, then you can put in a formal contest of the citation. Now, this, again, has to happen within 15 days of receipt of the citation, so don't miss that deadline. And that'll involve OSHA lawyers. The area office will send the case file to the OSHA lawyers in the Department of Labor. But you don't have to retain a lawyer. You can represent yourself and wait and see how it goes. And what I always say about lawyers is 90% of them give the rest of them a bad name. So anyway, you might retain a lawyer. You don't have to, but you do have the right to do a formal contest of it. Then, if the lawyers don't settle with you, it can go to an administrative law judge for a formal hearing. It's just like a trial. I had to do a couple of those, and it's not pleasant for anybody, but at least then it's a legal hearing, and then the administrative law judge can make a ruling that yes, the inspector was right, or no, they weren't, and he or she can do a lot of things to it. Then that may go up a step higher if the ALJ hearing doesn't turn out adequately. You can kick it up to the OSHA Review Commission. That's a 3-judge panel in Washington. I think it's got 2 on it right now in a vacant spot, and they hear appeals and they just pick up some of these decisions and review them, and they can overturn the previous one. But that doesn't have to be the end of it either. It can get appealed up to what I call the real court, U.S. Court of Appeals, and that'd be in the district where you are, and they'll hear it, but it won't be the whole trial over again. It's mostly where they, I think, go over the paper and the record and all that. And if that doesn't work out, then it can go all the way to the Supreme Court. And this has happened on a few of them. There's a case way back in the 70s. The Barlow case was a place out west denied entry to the OSHA inspector. And the inspector says, hey, it says I can get in here. So what that wound up was back to this getting the warrant. So the Supreme Court ruled on that. Said, OSHA, not only can you not muscle your way in there without a warrant, but get yourself a list of where you're going to go and don't just be dropping in on people. But that's way back in the 70s when OSHA was new. There is an OSHA booklet called Employer Rights and Responsibilities Following an Inspection, and it's on the OSHA website. We'll give you that in a little while here. And the OSHA inspector, when they're having the closing conference with you, should be able to give you a copy of that and other pertinent information. And if not, you can always go online and get it yourself or talk to your buddy down the street. All right, so that takes care of the inspection procedures. Now, I made up a do and don't list. This isn't all-inclusive or anything else, but I got a list of do's and a list of don'ts. So, my first do is a don't. Don't panic. Just remain rational. I mean, it happens to everybody. It's just your turn to be inspected. And like I said before, make sure they're a real OSHA compliance officer. And then make sure that you understand what the scope of the inspection is. Sometimes this gets kind of confusing. Inspectors are required to inspect things in plain sight. So if they're in there looking at testing for dust on a couple of operations and there's a big unguarded chain and sprocket that could take somebody's hand off, they're required to do something about that. So that's called plain sight. So if they tell you, well, we're just going to restrict it to the dust, and then they see that, you're liable for that. But generally try to understand what they're going to do and when and so on. And ask for a warrant if you have a reason. If it's corporate policy, fine. So that's up to you to decide. And then another do is treat the inspector like you'd like to be treated, because I remember when I was doing this, the first 10 minutes of the inspection was the most tense time from the inspector standpoint, because you don't know if the guy's coming across the desk at you or he's going to slap you on the back or farther down. So treat them like you would. Put yourself in their spot, because they're probably trying to put themselves in your spot. And then if they do ask you questions, I would suggest you answer them forthrightly. Don't start giving them half-truths and that sort of thing, because that can backfire on you. Then when you're with them, take good notes for yourself. And take legible notes, and the reason for that is sometimes I can't read my own notes, so I think a lot of us are like that. So take lots of notes. And then these programs, and we're going to give you a list of them later, have them ready and available. but wait till you're asked, you know. And if they say, well, let's see your hazard communication program, then pull out the notebook and you can give them that. In some places, when we consult, they've just got them all stacked up on a table ready to go. So when we have time, we take a look at them. But I would wait till you're asked by the inspector. And this number 9 here is pretty, I think this is one of the most important things for you to do, is to be patient and educate the compliance officer, because they don't know what you guys are doing or why you're doing it. And a lot of them think when they walk into a foundry for the first time that nobody can get out of there alive at the end of the day and that sort of thing. So you tell them why you do the different things you do, and eventually you might be able to loosen them up so you can have a good conversation with them. Another do is, the do list is longer than the don't, by the way. Do go with that compliance officer during the whole walkthrough. And if you've got a union, you could work that out, how you're going to do it with the union being along. The OSHA compliance officer is supposed to ask for employee representative. And then and it gets kind of boring if there's industrial hygiene sampling. I mean, they got a sample for the whole shift, so you're just standing around holding your various clipboards and shooting the breeze. But I'd stick with them. And then you should also ask questions like when they stop and look at something, ask them what they're looking at. Say, is there something wrong with that? That sort of thing. And they usually take pictures when they're out there. They'll take pictures of what they think may not be in compliance with the OSHA rules. And if you have with trade secrets, you might want to figure that out ahead of time, because if they're at the opening conference, you could say, hey, we got trade secrets. How are you going to treat that with pictures? And when I was doing it, I would just say, well, I need to take a picture of that, because they had informed me ahead of time that there was some trade secrets out there. And if they didn't tell me, I could never figure it out usually. But they can shoot around it. If it's an unguarded machine, they can take it from a different angle and get what they need, and then your trade secret wouldn't necessarily be in the picture. Okay, this is a good do here. Correct the easy stuff right away, and that really looks good. When I was an inspector, if I'd say, well, look at that over there, that guard is off. And if it was off 2 days later, I'd say, well, I don't think these guys are too serious, because it makes you look bad. So I'd say get that easy stuff right away or sooner. And then another good do is try to use the compliance officer's experience for the correction. You can ask them stuff like, what have you seen in other places that people do? All right. Another do is pay close attention during the closing conference, and ask questions, take lots of notes, and try to get it all ironed out so you'll understand what's going on. And then if you get a citation and it's not exactly what you were talking about or what you thought you were talking about at the closing conference, then you might want to go to an informal conference we talked about earlier to clear things up. And if you really dispute something, then you just formally contest it. Like things you think is not a hazard and they do, and you can contest that and then let the chips fall. And then maybe you think the compliance officer wasn't in your place long enough, or the penalty was too small, things like that. So if you really dispute something, go ahead and do it. Okay, now the don't list is kind of a repeat of the do list in some regards. So don't ask for a warrant if you don't have a reason. Like I said, it is pain to go get one, but they always get them, unless it's really off the wall. And I don't remember ever having one denied. And I suggest you don't tape record conversations with the compliance officer. That just muddies things up, and it shuts people off. So I'd say don't take anything personally. And if they say something's not right, don't get mad at them. That's their opinion. And these COSHOs, compliance officers, come in many different flavors, like people. Some are friendly, some are surly, some are quiet, some are talkative, just like people. They're almost like real people. Then don't act unprofessionally. Be appropriate. I think that's the thing we learned in kindergarten. And then another good don't is don't volunteer too much information because you don't want to hang yourself. But like I said before, answer their questions forthrightly and get along fine. And don't try to rush the co-show because then some of them have a tendency just to really slow down and look harder and harder. So just go at their pace. And then if you get to a point where there's something you don't understand, like you don't understand why they're looking at the cable on the skip hoist, you say, what's wrong with that? And then they can talk about the saddle on the horse, that sort of thing, how to put those clamps on. So I wouldn't go any farther till you understand what they're talking about. Up to a point. I don't be spending half a day looking at one thing. But, it's just an idea. And don't think the co-show won't find anything, because they will. There's always something you overlooked or. All right, continuing on with the don't list. Don't miss deadlines for corrections, notifications, contesting, and so on. If you don't formally contest in time or after that informal conference, you may lose your appeal rights. So you got 15 days from receipt of the citation. Don't forget to notify the local OSHA office after you've made corrections. If you need more time, you're having trouble, the budget's bad, business is off, and just let them know. And then ask for more time if you need it. And don't ever be reluctant to call the OSHA office. When I was over there, it was always a pleasure to get a call and work something out on the phone. Like somebody would call and say, well, we think this is not right. And what do you think? And then the compliance officer would tell you. So that's the do's and the don'ts. My version of do's and don'ts. Now I got a list here of programs and other information you might want to have ready for OSHA. A lot of it's required, so you do need it. And if you don't have it, they may write you up. So first thing they'll look for is the OSHA poster. I was just in a place 2 weeks ago that didn't have one, so there's still a few people out there. So they'll look for the OSHA poster, and you post that where workers would normally see notices, like anything. Like there's going to be a picnic Saturday, so wherever you'd post that, the same place you put up the OSHA poster. Then they'll want to be looking at your injury and illness logs. If you have more than 10 employees, anytime during the year, you have to keep the OSHA 300 log or state equivalent. And the 300A is the summary of that. That has to be posted for the months of February, March, and April for the previous year. So they'll be wanting to look for that. Then there's the chemical hazard communication. And this is for all chemicals. And OSHA's definition of chemical is pretty broad. It includes stuff like sand and binders and sprays and core washes and all that kind of stuff. And I used to employ Murphy's Law when I would do that. I'd walk through a place during the walkthrough, and then I would just take the name of something off of a can or wherever it was, and then go look for the safety data sheet on it. And Murphy's Law was usually the one that couldn't find. They'd say, oh, I know it's here, and search and search. So you might want to review that once in a while, that you've got these safety data sheets for all the chemicals. And you want to have a master list of the chemicals you have. That's required. And a lot of people don't know that. Then another program that may be required is bloodborne pathogens. If you have somebody whose job will entail them having contact with blood, and you need to have a written bloodborne pathogens program. And a good example of that is a plant nurse. If you're a real big place and somebody gets hurt, they know right where to go. So then you have to have that program for them. Now, if it's a Good Samaritan thing, like somebody gets a nosebleed and somebody else helps them out, that's not necessarily needing a program. Then you need a program for lockout, tagout, hardwired machinery like the mullers and that sort of thing. And there's a written program required for that. You don't need it for things that are plug-in cord connected, like a fan, a man cooler fan that you plug in. If you can service that and you can take all the energy out of it by unplugging it, you don't need to include that in the lockout takeout. But hardwired stuff is in anything that has residual energy in it is covered by the OSHA standard. It's 1910-147 for those of you who like numbers. Then emergency planning is another thing you're supposed to have. If you've got more than 10 employees, OSHA likes to see you have a little floor plan on how people are going to get out of there in case of fire or severe weather and, well, earthquake. We don't have many earthquakes around here, but so OSHA likes to see you figure this out ahead of time. So where are you gonna go hide in case of the tornado warning? I was talking to a group of auto dealers on just general stuff like this, and I said, "What do you guys do when the tornado warning comes?" And you got all that glass in the showrooms and all that, and the wise guy in the front says, "Oh, we do like everybody else. When we get the tornado warning, we go out in the parking lot and look for it." But then we talked about it some more, and then they found out that the best place for them to hide would be in the usually in the restroom. Those are, for some reason, they're built out of concrete block, so that's a good place. But figure that out ahead of time. All right. Then there may be a requirement for a program on emergency response. If you have large quantities of chemicals, you want to have a contingency plan what to do in case you get a big spill. Now, most foundries don't have enough stuff around there to worry about it. But if you have, a big silo full of some of your liquid binders, and that thing could rupture, then you want to be ready, because for the brief period of time that you have the spill, you're considered a hazardous waste site. Then another thing that the OSHA is pretty hot on right now is this powered industrial truck training. So you want to have a program, and I think it's because there's a high incidence of injuries on powered industrial trucks. So that's something you should have a written program about. Other programs, there's a few more here. The OSHA lately has been asking for a verification that somebody's done a hazard assessment for the selection of personal protective equipment. And the very basic to that is somebody in management writes, "Yes, I've done this. I've done a hazard assessment for PPE," but most places will have a list of the job and what kind of personal protective equipment is required to do it. Then if you have confined spaces, it gets pretty complicated. Like going into the sand silo from the top or into the bag house, if you got to be lowered into it and so on. It can get pretty complicated. And the basic thing is, if you got confined spaces and you don't want anybody in them, seal them up or lock them up or something so they can't get in. And if you do have a confined space and you're going to enter, then you need a program for it. And if you're going to have a contractor enter, you need to make sure they have a program. Okay. Other programs that may or may not be required by OSHA is the respiratory protection. If you need to have the workers wearing respirators to protect themselves, or you want them to, and you make them wear them, then you need a whole big, long program for it. If you voluntarily let them wear a respirator, then it depends on which ones you voluntarily let them wear, if you need a program or not. If it's more than a dust mask, called a filtering face piece, like the disposable, like 3M 8710 is a good example. If it's voluntary and it's more than a filtering face piece, then you have to do a few things. You need a short program for that. You have to make sure they're medically able to wear the thing, and the respirator in itself won't pose a hazard. That's what it boils down to for the voluntary use, strictly voluntary. And then if it's just a filtering face piece, you don't really need a program, but we made one up to give out to people, a program when you don't need a program, if it's just that filtering face piece. But the user still has to read part of the respirator standard, talking about, pick the right one and that sort of thing. All right, next one is hearing conservation. If you have an average noise level of more than 85 dBA for an 8-hour average, then you need to basically give them annual audiogram. If it's over 90 decibels, then the hearing protection is mandatory. Still got to give them the hearing test and so on. And if it's over 90, you're supposed to engineer it out as you can, which we know isn't always possible, but do what you can. Then there's other programs that OSHA could require. It depends if they're in the workplace or not. Like if you have lead as one of your alloys, then you need to follow the expanded lead standard. And that's got a lot of requirements in it. Written program, monitoring, medical, engineering controls, respiratory protection, and so on. And the same goes for cadmium and hexchrome. We find that sometimes in stainless steel, especially if it's being welded on. And the OSHA standard says if you have the possibility of hexchrome, you're supposed to have it monitored. Asbestos, that's getting to be a rare thing. You still might have some in the foundry, though. You might have it in transite on the pouring jackets or on wrapping some old steam lines. So if you got asbestos, treat it carefully. It's pretty potent stuff. Then formaldehyde is in some resins sometimes, so that has to be tested, and it's got another whole big standard. If you go over certain limits, you have to do certain things. All right, in the AFS website, the 10Q committee, Safety and Health Committee, put together a list of training and requirements for foundries. So you can pick this off on the AFSinc.org website and fish around in there for it. And it's about, noise exposure and highly hazardous chemicals. It depends on how much of a specific chemical you might have. Hazardous waste, generally you are not considered a hazardous waste site. And here's more training for the respirators, lockout, tagout, permit required confined spaces, medical, service, first aid. Then fire extinguisher. This gets a little controversial. If you are expecting workers to fight a fire with a fire extinguisher, you got to train them on how to do it. If you want them just to get out of there, or if it's a big fire, then you don't have to do much training. But if you're going to expect them to use it, you got to do some training. And then we already talked about this, powered industrial trucks. That has some classroom training and performance training connected with it. And then there's general things on welding and brazing and access to employee exposure medical records, and that gets a little dicey sometimes. But there's a right to privacy that can top anybody having access to medical records. But the exposure records, if people ask you for those, what was the dust level, then you need to train them that it's available. And then same with these expanded standards and hazard communication. You have to retrain people if a new chemical is introduced. Otherwise, it's a one-time thing. And inspectors will usually ask people if they know what chemical they're working with and what the hazards are connected with it and what measures they can take to protect themselves. Okay, going on to the next little subject here. And I just looked up the most frequently cited. This is for ferrous. And it's I got from the OSHA website. You can look this up yourself, www.osha.gov. Get to the front page and then tab inspection data, frequently cited, and select your SIC. And I only printed out the top 12, the dirty dozen, of the most frequently cited. They list them by the most frequent first. And look at this. In ferrous, it was respiratory protection, and then lockout, tagout. And then air contaminants. So apparently they're concentrating on the industrial hygiene aspects. And then wiring and guarding floors and noise, machine guarding, electrical. Hazard communication is down pretty far in the ferrous. That used to be the top runner all the time. There's always something wrong with the hazard communication program. And then powered industrial trucks. And then personal protective equipment. Probably that thing I talked about before, the verification of it. And this list goes on and on, down to the one thing got cited someplace. And this is just for federal states. So state plan states information is not included in this. Although you can get it off of that OSHA website. You can just punch in the state, and you can see what's popular in Indiana this year. So this was for October of '07 to September of '08. And here it is for non-ferrous. Respiratory protection again. And then lead. So that probably means not monitoring or something wrong with the medical aspects of it. Then lockout, tag out again, hazard communication, trucks, air contaminants. This is sounding redundant here. And then there's a general duty clause, and I should explain what that is. It's called 5A1, and it's in the OSHA Act itself, and it says the employer is responsible to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. Generally, OSHA's got regulations on regulations, but if there is not a regulation and it's a hazard, and it's a serious hazard, then they can use this general duty clause. So I don't know what these specific ones were, and then there's wiring and then general requirements and so on. Okay, here's some resources for you. And AFSinc.org has got a link to a lot of OSHA programs and training requirements for metal casters. And also, there was one of these webinars put on last December for personal protective equipment for melting and pouring, and that's recorded. And I watched it yesterday, and it seemed to be pretty good. So if you need a little review on that, you don't even have to read a book. Just punch into that and play that thing over. And, of course, you'll all want to listen to this one again. If you're having trouble going to sleep at night, just turn me on. Then there's another resource is OSHA.gov. They've got a lot of publications in there. And when their homepage comes up, it's got like the alphabet across the top. So if you're looking for something about silica, just punch on S and go to silica. They also have things called e-tools, and they're very good. And I'm remiss. I didn't look up and see if they've got anything on foundries yet. They were talking about doing that. But they've got some good stuff like in hospitals and so on. So if you work in a hospital, you can go punch into this e-tool, they call it. There's also an ASTM standard. It's the standard for practice for safety requirements in metal casting, sand preparation, molding and core making, melting and pouring, and cleaning and finishing, which sounds like a foundry to me. So that's, according to Fred, is a pretty good publication. I believe it is. Then your local ASSE, American Society of Safety Engineers, I believe that is. They may have some specific thing that could help you out. Talk to other foundries. You go to your local AFS meetings, and I'm sure you kick that around. So use they're in the same boat, so they may have a solution to a problem you've got. And then there's local safety organizations, and there's a lot of other safety and health issues and concerns and foundries that we haven't listed, like explosive dust, carbon monoxide, and so on. So it may be unique to the individual work site, but something for you to be aware of. And I think we have pretty much burned this thing up here. So, got any questions on what to do when OSHA shows up, if there's any of you left? Yeah.
Morning, everyone. This is Dave Krugman with the AFS Marketing Department. Thank Jim very much for his presentation. We're going to take about a minute or so to have you type in any questions you may have in the Q&A section at the bottom right hand of your screen. So again, we'll take about a minute or so for you guys to type those in. We'll take about 5 to 8 questions, give or take, and we'll be right back with you. So again, give us about 1 minute for you guys to formulate your questions, and we'll be right back. Thanks.
Okay, we're back. Got a few questions that came in. And first one is, what's ALJ stand for? That's Administrative Law Judge. That's a person in the OSHA Review Commission, and they're the ones that would have the hearing. So, next question is, what's a confined space? Which seems I should be able to give a good, quick answer for that. There is an appendix in the confined space regulation that talks about it, but generally speaking, a confined space is not normally occupied. It's big enough to get into physically, and it may contain a hazard. So that's a confined space. Then you have to decide if it's a permit-required confined space. So if people are going to go in it, then there's other regulations you have to do. So a confined space is a good example is a manhole, where the sewer is underneath the plant. That would be a confined space. And sand silo, another one. Bag house, just depending on the configuration. So I hope that answers that. Now we want to switch back to the don't screen. So I think that was the one referred to is don't miss deadlines for making corrections, notifications, contesting, and so on. Next one. There we go. No, that's the do. There we go. So yeah, don't miss the deadlines. Keep OSHA informed, or they'll think you're not doing anything. Notify them. They'll give you abatement dates, time by which they want you to have the thing fixed. So don't let those dates slip by. That's the main point of that. Oh, and
Alrighty, Jim. Thank you once again for a great presentation. One final question that came in. Will the slides be available post-production for either view or to print out? And the answer to that is yes. If you would, please contact me directly. Again, my name is Dave Krugman. My email address is dkrugman@afsinc.org. I would be happy to not only forward you the PowerPoint presentation, and I would also, any questions you have or anything regarding this webinar or any other webinars for that matter, after the fact, certainly will be available to take those. So on behalf of the American Founders Society, we thank you very much for attending today's webinar. And again, thank Jim very much. And if there's, and have a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.